Number 1. Blackie. I had a really scary experience once on Halloween. But before we get to Halloween, I need to give you a little backstory. I really like cats. I have a few of my own, but I like to interact with the cats in the neighborhood too. My cats are all indoor cats, but a lot of cats in the neighborhood are indoor-outdoor cats, or simply outdoor cats. I buy extra food, and I take it out and feed it to the local cats when I go for walks. I've made a lot of furry friends that way. Now, there is one cat that I've always found to be really interesting. He's a pure black cat that I began calling Blackie. I was always able to put down food for Blackie and he would eat it, but no matter what I did, I couldn't get him to come close enough for petting. I would sit down on the ground and put my palm out. I would always do the, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty," thing that always seemed to work with cats. He would look at me, but he would only come within a few feet of me, and when I eventually had to leave, he wouldn't follow me, and he wouldn't leave. He would sit there and stoically watch me as I walked away from him. I would see him if I turned around and looked back at him. He would be there until I turned the corner or something like that. Seeing Blackie was a regular thing. He usually hangs out at the cemetery, which is a couple blocks down and over from where my house is. I figure maybe he liked hanging out on tombstones or something like that, but even through our relationship and exchange of food, he still never came close enough for me to pet him. But I didn't really care. I was just happy to have him around. I was still in high school when this happened, and on Halloween we had a dance. I didn't have a date to the dance, but I was a volunteer to help out there. So I was out pretty late, but I enjoyed seeing all the costume ideas that others could come up with, and people were always doing their best to outdo each other. After the dance was over, I had to stay after and clean up, so by the time I got to go home, it was very late. I didn't have a car. I didn't want to call my parents so late, because the party was on a weekday, and they had to work the next morning. I wasn't scared of the dark or anything, not even on Halloween, so I had no problem just walking home that night. It was very cool outside, and there weren't a lot of people around. Trick-or-treating was long over by that point. There were houses that must have been having their own Halloween parties, because there were a few noisy houses that I walked by. Anyway, I know a lot of people might not have done this, but like I mentioned, I wasn't really scared of the dark or anything like that. So I decided I would do something Halloween-y and cut through the cemetery on the way home. I was thinking about Blackie. I had some cat treats in my pocket like usual, and I figured that running into him in a graveyard on Halloween night could be really cool. I cut through the graveyard, not really expecting to be scared or anything, and I wasn't. There were a few lights here and there, but it was also a very old cemetery. I know that they didn't bury any new people in it, and being that it was Halloween, I expected to come across some teenagers smoking pot, drinking, or making out, and I did a couple times, but just changed directions. I have to admit again to not really being scared. I just hoped to run into Blackie, but that looked like it wasn't going to happen. I normally saw him in the early evening before the sun went down, so it wasn't much of a shock that I didn't run into him. And then I heard a noise from behind me. Before I can turn around and see what the noise was, someone grabbed me roughly from behind. Before I could yell, I felt their hand cover up my mouth. I couldn't tell anything about the person, other than he was very, very strong, and I couldn't really fight him very much. The man was dragging me backwards. I was terrified, not knowing what was going to happen to me. I mean, I did think of a few specific things, but they weren't possibilities that I really like to think much about. He dragged me behind a very tall monument. I think I was crying at that point, but only tears, because he still had my mouth covered fully. I was completely terrified, and then I heard it. First it was the distinct sound of a cat shrieking, followed very quickly by the sound of a man shrieking. The man let go of me, and because I had been struggling to get away from him, I fell to the ground. Looking behind me, I saw the man on the ground struggling for a bit, and then I noticed a dark shadow, shaped like a cat, on his head. I knew immediately that it had to be Blackie. I wanted to grab Blackie and run with him, but he didn't stick around long after slashing the guy's face up pretty bad. There was enough light for me to see that he looked like his face had gone a few rounds with Freddy Krueger. But after his work was done and I was free, Blackie ran off into the cemetery. I took that as my signal to run, and I did. I ran through the cemetery, out of the cemetery, and the 3 blocks to my house. I immediately called the police to tell them what happened. The guy didn't follow me. I guess either he was in too much pain or he was afraid of being caught. So the police didn't catch him that night. The following day, though, I went back to the edge of the cemetery before it got dark, looking for Blackie. After a while I found him. He had a bit of a limp, but he seemed all right. I had a really special treat for him that day, too. He may have saved my life, and that more than earned him a bowl full of tuna. As normal, Blackie didn't let me pet him, but he ate up all the tuna, and I collected the bowl. This time, though, rather than watch me go home, he followed me home. He began hanging out on my porch and eventually became trusting enough to get some pets. He still hangs out outside my house a lot. I've invited him in a few times, but he's not interested in that. He seems to enjoy his outdoor life, and I always appreciate what he did for me. Number 2, The Dare. When I was 12 years old, I definitely was not one of the more popular kids in school. I don't think that I was a nerd, but I was kind of small. And I think that being small got me to be picked on quite a bit. There were a lot of bullies at my school too, which made my life there pretty miserable. I did have friends though. A small group of us were regularly picked on by others, and that brought us together as friends. But we also did have plenty in common as well, so it worked out pretty good. I remember that year when the 4 of us went trick-or-treating together. It was Halloween, of course, and we enjoyed being in costume and somewhat anonymous. It was a little easier to exist around a bunch of kids who bullied us when we were in costume, although in retrospect it probably wasn't hard to tell who we were. Fortunately, we didn't run into any problems at night while trick-or-treating, but after a while, when the trick-or-treating was winding down, we were also getting a little bored with it. But we didn't have to be home early, or anything like that. So we decided to go off and try to find some Halloween kind of things to do. One of my buddies had what he thought was a great idea. There was an old well that was behind an old abandoned house on the outside of town. We knew about it because a lot of people tried to get into the house for drinking and stuff like that. There were no rumors of the place being haunted or anything like that, as far as I knew. Plus, we have all seen The Ring, so an old well was very scary to us. So we decided to go and check it out. We figured there might be older teenagers hanging out in the old house that night. They could have been drinking or smoking or something like that. But we weren't planning on trying to get in there or anything. We just thought we would go and check out the well that was in the field behind the house. When we got up to the well, it was very, very dark. We kept things lighted with our phones, but those flashlights don't really produce too much light. It was a normal above-ground well. It was a brick cylinder. There wasn't a roof on it or a drop-down bucket. There was a cover on the well, and I dared my friend Andy to go up to the well and push it off. I could tell he was a little bit scared to do it. But we were 12-year-old boys, and even though we were buddies, we would have made fun of each other for being scared. So Andy went over to the well and tried pushing the wooden cover off the well. It took him a while to do it, but he was able to push the lid off. It made a crashing sound as it fell off and hit the ground. and that startled him and he ran back to us. We all laughed at Andy for being scared, so of course he had to get defensive. He then dared me to go over to the well and peek down into it. Now, I really did not want to do this, but we were all laughing at Andy, and I didn't want my friends laughing at me for not taking the dare, so I decided that I would do it. So I walked up slowly to the well. I had to stand up on my tiptoes to be able to lean over and look down in it, though. I was slightly off balance, but I was able to get myself up to peer down into the darkness. I couldn't see a single thing. I was curious at that point, though, so I thought I would use my phone to look down there and see. My heart was pounding in my chest because I was scared, but I thought I should look with the light. However, before I had a chance to do that, I felt someone grab me from behind. Whoever it was, they were able to lift me so that my feet were off the ground, and they pushed me further into the opening of the well. The good top half of my body was into the entrance of the well in no time, and despite it being a bad idea, I began flailing and trying to get away. I heard my friends making some noise, but I couldn't understand what they were carrying on about. I was just doing whatever I could to get away without falling into the well. I was forced to be looking down into it by whoever was holding me, and it was just this completely dark abyss that I was staring into. I could hear whoever was holding me taunting me, and I knew then it was this kid Derek from the neighborhood who picked on me and my friends quite a bit, and his grip on me didn't seem like it was very good. The guy was really cruel most of the time, and I had little doubt that he would drop me into the well. I would be going down into that dark and wet hole in the ground, head first. I was struggling, which I mentioned before was probably not the best idea. I was screaming, telling him to let go of me, which in retrospect was probably also not the best idea, but I wasn't thinking. I was just as scared as possible. So he was taunting me, telling me he was about to let go. And I wasn't just scared of being in a well, but hell, I was scared of something scary being down in that well too. But at the time, I had no doubt I was going down. Eventually, he did actually let go of me, but he didn't really pull me back. I felt like I was about to slip into the well, but I was able to grab the top of the well and keep myself from falling in. But even at that moment, I braced myself because I thought that he was going to push me into it. I felt some hands on me again and I screamed, but the hands were pulling me back off the well. When I was out, I noticed that it was my friends pulling me out and not Derek. I was crying a bit when I got pulled out. Derek was walking away with 4 of his friends, mocking me for being such a big baby. Fortunately, none of my friends teased me about it. I mean, even friends sometimes do that, but they realized how scared I had been and didn't do that. It was the coolest my friends had ever been in a situation like that. I would like to say that it was the last time I got bullied or put into a scary situation like that, but I can't say that. What I can say is that it was the scariest. Number 3, Halloween night. I have only had one scary experience on Halloween, and it happened when I stayed home by myself. I was 16 years old at the time. My parents and siblings were going to a Halloween party. I had to study for a test, and I really wasn't into the whole horror thing at the time, so I didn't accompany them to the party. I tend to study best while watching something on TV. I'm not sure why, but it helps. And I wasn't watching Halloween-related anything. We also didn't have trick-or-treating go by our house because our house was sort of out of town. So it would of course be a night where I could truly spend my time alone. So I was studying. I think it was around 10 p.m., and I had the TV turned on to Comedy Central or something, and then I heard the most blood-curdling female scream that I'd ever heard in my life. It was coming from the second story of our house, and it was so loud and sounded absolutely terrified. I dropped my book and jumped out of the chair. I didn't know what the hell the noise could have come from, but I knew that I had heard it, and it made no sense at all because there was nobody in our house. Still, and I don't completely know why I did this, I decided to go and see what could have possibly made that scream. I didn't think about calling anyone or anything like that. I wasn't sitting in the dark, obviously, because I had been studying. So I got up and turned on the lights to the stairs. I called out, "Hello," a few times, trying to get the attention of whomever was screaming, but I didn't get an answer. I quietly crept up the stairs very slowly and made sure to turn on the upstairs hall light as soon as possible. And I still called out each time that I went into a room. I turned all of the lights on before going into any of the rooms and opened up all the doors. And then I went and searched the rooms. I checked everywhere that there was to check. I looked in the closets. I looked under the beds. I even looked in the vanity in the bathrooms. I checked out the showers. There was nobody in the upstairs at all. And that's when I remembered the attic. And I knew it was possible that that was where the noise could have come from. So I had to pull the door down from the ceiling. And yes, I went up into the attic by myself to see if someone was up there. I did the stupid thing that someone always does in a horror movie. But as stupid as it was, it didn't result in anything bad happening to me. There was no one hurt up in the attic, and there was no one unhurt up in the attic. The house was completely empty other than me. I went back downstairs and tried to focus on my studying again, but I was too freaked out to really concentrate on it. It wasn't like the noise I heard could have been mistaken for something else. It was a loud and clear female scream, and it was without a doubt coming from the second story of our house. There weren't any houses close to us either, but I was certain that that noise had not come from outside. That thought did make me even more scared, though. I mean, what if it had been coming from the roof of the house? But there was no way that I was going to check out the roof. Even I had my limits of what I was willing to do. When my parents came home, I told them what had happened. My dad checked out the whole house, including looking on the roof. He also looked around outside of the house. Not only did he not find anything, he didn't find any evidence of anything that would have caused someone to scream. My parents racked it up to my imagination. I always hate when people do that, though. There is no way that what I heard wasn't real. My imagination is not that good. And even if it was, there wasn't any reason I would be thinking about screaming, even though it was Halloween. My siblings thought I was making it up as a Halloween prank to scare them. I never found out what it was, but I know that I absolutely heard it.
Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.